All right, welcome everybody. My name's Will Bauer. Thanks for being here. So I'm gonna kind of present my experience teaching and revising the OpenSciED Cancer Unit. Um, So a little bit about me, if I haven't met you before. So I'm currently a high school science teacher in Washougal, Washington. It's in Southwest Washington, and I'm teaching physical science. Uh, right now, using like a mixture of the high school open science chemistry and physics units. Um, and last school year, I was out of the classroom working for the educational service districts within Washington as the Open Science project manager. And that was a grant funded project using ESSER funds. And so those COVID monies went away and so did my position. So I'm back in the classroom. Before that, I taught middle school open science materials and the stuff that I'm going to be sharing today is coming from the spring of 2022 when I was teaching in Vancouver Public Schools. And then I have two kids and a wife. My son, he's now in first grade and he goes to a dual language Spanish immersion program. And my daughter is 4 and goes to like a dance school and a forest school for preschool. So they're a lot of fun. Why don't you drop in the chat? Let me know like where you're coming from and what you hope to gain from this session before I kind of share the agenda. So let me know where you're coming from and what you hope to gain from being here. And if you're bold enough, you can just unmute and just share. Annette, I know where you're coming from. Down the hall. You're coming from home, but you're a teacher down the hallway. All right, we got somebody coming from Maine. Is it like 7 or Massachusetts? So it's like 7 o'clock there. Uh, already had dinner from Louisiana. Great.
Hi, Will. I'm Penny.
Hello.
I just thought your topic was incredibly interesting, so I thought I'd just log in and hear it.
All right, awesome.
Nothing in particular.
Okay. Are you a teacher or?
I am a teacher. I teach in an online high school and I teach a variety of lab sciences.
All right, awesome. So we got somebody here from systems biology. Um, I know Jenna uh, and Jen. I've come across you guys at Open Science trainings in the past. Well, thank you all for being here. Here's kind of my agenda. All right, we've got Texas represented. Okay, great. So here is kind of my agenda. So I'll give like a kind of an overview of the unit, um, and and then we'll kind of have a short discussion about how to kind of prepare students and yourself, like socially, emotionally, for dealing with a topic like cancer, because things will definitely come up as you teach this unit. So we'll have a short time to discuss in breakout rooms for that in a few minutes. Then I'll share kind of my experience and how I took the field test unit and adapted it to my local context and what connected with my students. And then I'll share kind of how I became part of the revision team and the revisions that I contributed to that are in the newly released versions. And then I'll kind of end talking about how the unit's been reviewed by the EQUIP rubric and the NGSS peer review panel. And then we'll open it up for question and answers. Okay. So I will drop this link here. So this is my like landing page. Uh, and it's like the link with all the links. Okay. So anything so the slides are here, my contact information is there, and then all the things that I'll be kind of sharing, I won't have time to like link it into the chat and get the chat all messy, but it's in chronological order. So you can all of that is there. So bookmark that. And if you see people come in late, if you wouldn't mind helping out, since I'm flying solo here, to drop that into the chat for them as they come in late. So that's the agenda. We'll get started here. So the way that the unit is structured is kind of in 3 parts. So the first lesson set, which is lessons 1 through 6, is focused on the genetic basis of cancer. So kind of like cell divisions. There's some mistakes that happen, and people who tend to be taller and older are more likely to get cancer. And then lesson set 2 dives into some of the other reasons people get cancer due to inherited factors or increased or lifestyle choices or exposures. And then the last lesson set is about what we can do about all this. So you recognize that there's some disparities in outcomes for and incidences of cancer rates. And so then the last couple lessons are really focused on solutions. And so with each of those kind of lesson sets, they're sort of punctuated with an assessment. So with OpenSciED, you kind of start with an anchor phenomena, and you're addressing this question of who gets cancer and why. And here are the questions that my students came up with. And we've got stuff about location, treatments, genetics. They're really curious about different types of animals that got cancer. And so that's kind of how we started off the unit. And as we work through the first 6 lessons, we kind of end that first lesson set with a class consensus model. So we kind of go through each lesson and make kind of a checklist. So on the right here is our like, gotta have a checklist. These are the things that we need to include in our model for it to be complete. And we kind of talked about the different evidence we looked at along the way. And so the first 6 lesson sets really is focused around a single gene related to cancer called P53. Obviously, like cancer is more complex than that, but that is what we focus on. And then we kind of, students did make their like individual models, and we kind of merge our ideas to kind of come to a consensus about how cell division, the DNA, mRNA, protein pathway, how what all that has to do with cancer. Sometimes the conversation diverged a little bit. We've got some stuff about spike proteins and the COVID vaccines, which were, and still are a topic on the minds of students. So that was kind of our initial ideas that we kind of came together about halfway through the unit. And then from there, we get into more of the causes of cancer. And so that ends with this assessment, which I linked on the landing page, where you get into genetic testing. And so students take an assessment here where they look at some data about family history for lactose intolerance and celiac disease. And the part 2 of that test is they look at genetic testing like without a family history, and they explore the age-related macular degeneration. Yeah, the Fred Hutch cancer curriculum that is very closely related. I know they're coming out with the unit, and yeah, there's definitely some cross connections. The cell cycle game, which came from Fred Hutch, is it's an open education resource that got borrowed into this unit. And some people that I met through the Fred Hutch program made it into the unit as well, but I'll talk more about that later. So for those of you not from Washington, Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center is in Seattle, and they do a lot of education programs. So then the last lesson set is all about what we can do. And that ends with an assessment where students are coming up with a interview protocol as if they were accompanying a loved one to a doctor's visit. And so they apply what they've learned about genetics and social determinants of health and other risk factors for lifestyle. You can see there's kind of like a word bank up here. They apply that and come up with a list of questions that they would ask if they were having to take that role of being with somebody during a visit, whether it's cancer or some other maybe disease that has an inheritable component. So that's like, a real life skill that we probably all been in that position or will be in that position. So that's kind of where the unit ends. So let's kind of go back to the beginning and talk about how do you launch this unit with students? I found it was really important that I kind of gave a heads up to parents and to the school counselor that, hey, we're going to talk about cancer for a couple months here in class. And I was new to the school in Vancouver, Washington, and didn't know people's family history and stuff. So I was really glad that I kind of made those initial communications. And within the curriculum, there is like a home communication template, uh, like letter that you can personalize and modify as you wish. Um, but like the first couple slides of the unit are like this. You kind of introduce it, say that, cancer is something that affects all of us, but and some are preventable, especially related to smoking. And you go into establishing norms. So these are the norms that are kind of embedded with the open side curriculum, but teachers often like adapt and modify those for their set of students and their school. Um, and then you have students kind of journal and think about their personal experiences or things they've heard or seen about in the news about cancer. And what maybe science ideas they have from previous classes they might know about. And then you start to talk. And as you're going into this unit, it's really important that students feel safe to share. And so we're going to have a short conversation about what needs to happen for that to be a comfortable place for them to share. So I want us to have a short time to kind of introduce yourself and say where you're coming from with the people in your breakout room, and then discuss this topic. What emotional supports do you anticipate your students and yourself will need to learn about cancer for an extended period of time? Okay, so I am going to toss that into the chat as our topic of conversation. And I'll give you set up some breakout rooms here. Okay, where are my breakout rooms? All right, everybody just left my screen. Let's stop sharing. Okay. Let's do assign automatically. Let's do 4 breakout rooms. All right. Okay, so about 5 minutes discussing, what social emotional supports for your students and yourself will need to learn about cancer for an extended period of time. So go ahead and join your room. All right, the rest of us will be here in about 5 seconds. All right. So welcome back. I know that was like that probably could be that question could probably be a whole presentation in and of itself. So on the landing page, there is a some guidance around SEL supports that's in the teacher's guide. So there's a lot of great strategies here that are compiled, and you can kind of figure out what works best for your students. Uh, and we won't go over each one right now, but that's linked there for you to look at later. And as I dropped into one of the breakout rooms, I heard someone say like, well, if you as the teacher are kind of like open about your experience, that can open and make other people feel comfortable sharing. And I really kind of modeled that with my students. So uh, as I was like in the process of teaching this unit, my aunt had died about a month before from cancer, and my uncle also had like a terminal diagnosis and died about 2 months after teaching this unit. So my dad lost two of his siblings within about 6 months from cancer. And I was just upfront with students sharing that, and that was on my mind. And I felt like it really opened up the empathy, like them for me and us for each other. And I had really like a lot of questions myself, like why did my aunt get cancer? Like, and my dad didn't. And so I was putting up those sort of questions in the driving question board, and it was kind of raw and fresh for me at that point. But I feel like it helped kind of made the students like less hesitant to go deep and real with the unit. And so one of the things that like came up for me was like my family has a farm, and there's a lot of pesticide exposure. And so there's a story that I shared to kind of kick off the unit about the kind of the better living through chemistry era of agriculture that my grandfather was contributed to. So I'll play a short clip of that. Let me know if you can't hear the audio.
Well, Rob would know the most about the chemicals because after we stopped doing the para-retreat, he went through and cleaned out all the old chemicals, including the DDT that my dad had bought, knowing it was going to be banned. He didn't think long term and what it would do to the environment. As chickens will kind of dig a little bowl in the ground to take a dust bath in. They'll go in and fluff the dirt under their feathers to try to get rid of their lice. So we put DDT in there. And then the chicken's eggs came out very fragile, or some came out with no shell, just the sac and the egg. And we ate those.
So hopefully, I don't know if the audio came through okay, but the synopsis of the story is that my grandfather, who was an agricultural chemist, when he heard DDT was going to be banned, he went out and stockpiled and bought more and hid it on our farm and gave it to our chickens. And then my parents, or my dad and his siblings, ate the eggs without shells, only membrane, from birds that were exposed to DDT. So made me think about cancer and what caused it in a personal way. And I also shared, like it affects old people, but I also had lost a student from cancer early in my teaching career. And so that was something that I shared up front with students at the beginning of the unit. And so that was like, a personal adaptation that I made to make it, that is something that I was curious about. And I think helped engage students right from the beginning. And then, so now I'll kind of talk about some additional adaptations I made to the field test version. I really tried to incorporate stories from survivors, and I'll kind of share how I did that. And then I also made a lot of connections to local public health and the data that they could provide. And then at the end of the unit, the capstone was that they got to speak with someone who is a healthcare navigator, so they could kind of see like what the assessment at the end was of the unit was asking them to do. Like, what does the healthcare navigator actually do? How do they support people like from a non-medical like role? Like, how are they effective? So I'll talk about that. So I just happened to be like reading the local newspaper, and they did a news story, which is linked in the landing page, about these two women that started breast cancer survivors that started a podcast called Rotten Melons: When Your Boobs Do You Wrong. And I thought, wow, they have a sense of humor. They're cancer survivors. They're also labor and delivery nurses. They would make the perfect guest speaker to talk to a bunch of high school sophomores about their stories. And so I didn't know them. I just found their podcast and connected them through Facebook and cold call them. And they are like, yeah, we'll spend the day with a bunch of high school students. One came in via Zoom and one came in person. And the person who came, Meredith, who came in person, she brought her cancer binder that had all her genetic tests that she had undergone. And it was just an amazing resource, to say that this is way more complicated than just P53. There's so many things that you can get tested for breast cancer, and there's family history, and there's exposure, and kids who hadn't really engaged or talked all year couldn't stop asking them questions. And so that was and then I invited like the local district media person to come capture that visit. And so here's a little bit kind of about their story and their podcast, and there's a link to the podcast. It was kind of fun to listen to the next episode after their visit, and got a little shout out from their high school visit. They talked about that. And so they're good friends, and we're really open in sharing their experience with students. Something that I couldn't do at not having had any experience directly with cancer. And then I also made a lot of connections locally with public health at the state level and at the county level. So I was able to really support some of the ideas that are brought into the unit about health disparities and outcomes and by specific types of cancer. And then also I tried to engage my students in this. There's a youth science contest in Washington State that's run by the Department of Health, where students kind of do a project that involves using data that's publicly available. I tried to get my students to do it, but none of them took me up on it. But they got to look at the data anyways as part of class. So these were some of the things that like we talked about, like so here's prostate cancer. And you can see there's a clear disparity between Black people and other groups. And some of it is like almost 5 times the rate. And so that really helped motivate our questions about like healthcare and access and social determinants of health. Um, uh, so And then there was also able to pull some data about breast cancer, which was made even more meaningful after the visit of our 2 survivors. And you can see there's some similar disparities where the rates are 2 to 3 times higher depending on the racial group. And that was just within Washington. And then even I think it's Native Hawaiian Oceanic Pacific Islanders is, I think, that acronym. And so then I was able to either get even more local, like to look at the county level. And this isn't directly to cancer, but I thought it was just, when I saw this, it was very, I just had no idea that like a Pacific Islander male 23 years of life expectancy compared to almost 90 years, that within the same county that there's that much disparity. It's really eye-opening. And the students had a lot of questions about that. And then also like later in the unit around social determinants of health. There was an amazing website that the county had put together, and I taught this in 2022. They've already kind of updated the statistics and stuff. But there's this like story map that they made with GIS, and you can, you know, look at all sorts of different things like related to education, and it's color coded by, you know, by different census tracts and stuff. And I know I'm sharing a lot of stuff like from Washington and Clark County, but I'm sure your public health departments where you live has similar resources. I encourage you to access those, because you know the students make so much more meaning if they know they've been that in that location where that's the cancer rates are there, or that's where there's not access to healthcare, or that's where there's more air pollution or whatever. And so yeah, and then the data, like, you know, it's kind of been massaged and displayed in ways that are easy for students to identify the trends. Another thing that we did that wasn't part of the curriculum was it just so happened that there was a Washington State Department of Health National Minority Health webinar. And so it just happened to be timed with my 4th period class. It was a weird coincidence. And so we just hopped on the Zoom and took notes and asked questions during the webinar with the state director of health and a state senator and others. And I shared that like on Twitter and got a compliment from a state senator about the notes I took on the whiteboard, which meant a lot to me. But you can see we covered all sorts of things about diversifying healthcare and social determinants of health, and the need for more BIPOC representation in medical fields. And so, you know, like I think my class was maybe 50–60% students of color, and it was amazing for them to hear that from decision makers and people in positions of power. So at the end of the unit in lesson 12, you go into this healthcare navigators. And one really, I think, helpful introduction is this article that from NPR that came out that talks about how in Delaware, healthcare navigators are shrinking the racial gap. So I'll play a short clip about that. Maybe I won't. Okay. Well, it's linked there, so we'll move forward. But I think it's really important that you kind of finish the unit and work on lessons 11 and 12, because like if you don't, you're not really like, that's where all the hope and agency and empowerment comes in at the end. And then with my unit, I shared that I had a guest speaker come in, Nayani Dunner, who runs a prostate cancer support group. And so here's kind of how I invited her. Again, someone I didn't know. I just Googled cancer support groups locally and found her name and got a hold of her, and she came in to my classroom. And I kind of prep students to kind of explain what she does, and here's some of the questions that they had. Why is healthcare and hospitals so expensive? How does stress impact cancer risk? What made you want to educate people on this topic? What factors cause prostate cancer specifically? So a lot of great questions, you know, and then this last question kind of made me a little bit sad that they said, what can youth or people without the ability to make larger changes happen do to address the social determinants of health? And I thought the way she handled that question was amazing, because their takeaways were so cool. Like that, you know, they said the laws are how we as a society collectively show our values. And they were able to identify things about downstream and upstream things about healthcare. Talked about, evaluating risk, that there's things that we can do to help people without being doctors and nurses. The importance of catching it early. Okay, so those are some great life lessons to take away from this unit at the end. And then here's a quote from one of my students, that I realize that I'm not untouchable. Anyone can get cancer, and I should start to just think about making sure I can do all I can to prevent myself from getting cancer. Okay. All right, a couple review and extension resources. So these aren't part of the curriculum, but these are just things that I found that I thought were useful. So there's a nice video that I linked to about that, kind of like if you have students come in mid-semester and they didn't get through lessons 1 through 6, there's like a 10-minute video that does a great job summarizing Peto's paradox, which is this thing where you would expect that as animals get bigger in size, they have more cells and they live longer, that they would have higher cancer rates than smaller animals that don't live as long, that their cells don't divide as much. But that isn't the case. That some animals, like elephants and whales, which you would expect to have because of their size and age, that they life expectancy, they would have a lot of cancer. They don't. And that's part of that's because they have a lot of copies of P53, which helps repair DNA damage and induces programmed cell death when there's errors that are made. And humans just have a set of those genes, and so it makes us more susceptible to cancer compared to our body type.
Animals come in.
And then another thing that I did to kind of help keep students like on track and catch up for when they were gone, and that I was teaching this in 2022, so we battled through the like Omicron wave, I believe. So I have this kind of routine in my classroom that I still use today, where kind of after each lesson, I update my classroom website, which I will show, and then students fill out kind of a summary table or a progress tracker describing like what they figured out from the evidence that I've provided. And then it's a great way like to share with parents, to say, here's where we're at lesson 7, this is how far students should be, and these are the things that we're talking about in class. So this is the progress track, or the evidence that I would link to, and so I'd update this as we go. And you can kind of see the like progression of the questions in the unit and links to the data and stuff. And so this was a great resource to maintain for students that needed to review, and everything was all in one spot. Another thing that like I ended up not using, but I found it and I wanted to share with everyone, is this ProPublica project that is about air pollution and cancer, and it has all these like amazing maps about like specific sources of air pollution and local cancer rates. So it's a great resource to explore, especially as you get like later in the unit, like around when you lesson 8 or 9, where you start thinking about environmental impacts and cancer rates. So as I finished teaching the unit, I kind of shared what I did. So I invited the media, and we had the guest speaker, and then I kind of made a tweet, a long tweet that I shared, and it got noticed by the Bill Penwell, who's the director of who's a professor at CU Boulder and is kind of the director of the high school Open SciEd project, and he also helped direct like the Inquiry Hub units, if you're familiar with those. And so through this connection, by sharing my work on Twitter, of all places, I was invited to be part of the writing team. And then later that fall, the Department of Health reached out to me and kind of wrote a blog series as part of their Public Health Connection blog, which kind of explains a lot of what I've shared today of how I brought cancer to the classroom, cancer education to the classroom, I should say. And so, so in about like, I think it was October 2022, we had our like first meeting with me and a couple other people who are on the writing team, like the kind of like the original authors of the unit and that I field tested. And then 2 or 3 other people kind of joined our team, and we kind of looked through the unit, and we had all these different sources of feedback because this unit had been tested in like 100 different classrooms across the country in 10 different states. And one of the things that came up through the field test, like in almost every state, was that teachers kind of stopped teaching the lesson, like the unit at lesson 8. And so we were kind of puzzled by that and wanted to understand why and what we could do to like motivate teachers to feel comfortable and excited to continue to the end of the unit where you actually talk about solutions and also some of the health disparities that exist in our society. And I think like a lot of the hesitancy came like, this quote was from a field test teacher that said, "I'm personally concerned about opening myself up to attacks from families who don't want the biology class teaching about social issues that they have to cover their butt." And I totally understand that. And that was something that we had to think about as part of our revision, as we're developing a curriculum that we want to be used in all states, in all classrooms, or as many as possible. And so we had like a lot of different layers of feedback. So there's the field test version got reviewed by the EQUIP rubric for kind of its alignment with the NGSS standards and the standards that we were and performance expectations that we were claiming. And then there was feedback from the field test, which includes like surveys of students and then also the teachers. And then the SSC is it's like the state steering committee. So the 10 partner states, Washington was one of them. Louisiana was another. They had feedback as well. And then the team that I joined was part of the co-revision team. And so there's some things that, we wanted to modify and change. And so that like, to meet this, we had to include some more stuff about feedback mechanisms. And so how do we incorporate that by still staying true to the phenomena of cancer? Where does that fit in and what lesson? And so we can make sure we're hitting the standards, also, addressing the students' questions that they had, and then also sticking on topic to the phenomena. So that's like it's a difficult thing to strike that balance. It's one thing I learned through this process. So one of the contributions that I made to the unit was I helped to kind of revise and rewrite the lesson level performance expectations, which are kind of like the lesson specific learning targets, so that they align to what is actually done in the lesson, or we modified the lesson so that there's alignment. That was a long, extensive process. And from that, one of the changes that we made was we added an interview with somebody that I knew from Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, Dr. Stephanie Battle. So she studies ovarian cancer, or did when she was getting her postdoc or doctorate at UW. And so here's me and her a few years ago, 10 years ago, actually, having so much fun pipetting. Look at us smile. So here's her interview. That's a new thing in the curriculum. So she's talking about why we use mice as models for cancer.
Yes, in the ovarian cancer work that we do use mice. And mice are a really useful tool to help us understand how the therapies and the biological mechanisms of a disease that we're trying to study, how they work in a living system. So a lot of times what happens is you'll work on in a dish. You know, we have our cells growing in a little plastic dish, and you can add a drug to it, and you may observe that the cells die. And so you think, wow, this is really cool. We've found something that will kill the cancer cells. But then when you go into a living system, you don't have the same effects. And so for the ovarian cancer work that I was doing, one of the things that was important is that we needed to be able to collect cells, tumor cells, that had grown in a living system. Once we put them on plastic and grow them in a dish, they lose some of their properties, and the things that we want to study in them, the mechanisms of how they grow and how they cause cancer, some of those can be lost or altered. So it's better to try and get them from a system, a living system like the mouse. There's a lot of similarities between mouse and human, which makes this quite convenient for us. And then hopefully we can translate what we learn in the mouse to help improve patient lives as well, and patient outcomes.
All right, so that's in lesson one. You hear from Stephanie, and then later in the unit, I think starting in lesson 8, you start to explore hereditary cancers. And so one shift from the field test version to the release version is that we added kind of an emphasis on Li-Fraumeni syndrome, which is people who have an inherited mutation to the p53 gene that the students learn about in the first half of the unit. And so that inheriting this p53 mutation causes a great increase in cancer risk in young people. And this is a very rare mutation. And students will listen to some interviews that I did with 2 people who have Li-Fraumeni syndrome. So Lakita, pictured here, who's from Kenya, and Lauren, who lives in Miami, and they both have gotten cancer and survived, and have this genetic syndrome that makes it puts them at much higher risk than the normal person at younger ages. So you hear their stories in lessons 8, and then 11 and 12, I think, or 8, 10, and 12. And so here's there's a link to a news story that where Lauren kind of describes her diagnosis and her disease. I just connected to Lauren through the reporter that did that story, and connected to Lakita in Kenya through the Li-Fraumeni syndrome association. So I reached out to them saying, hey, I want to interview somebody who's a younger student for this high school curriculum, and they directed me to Lakita. And I had to wake up at I think 2 in-the-morning to do a Zoom call, and so that was 3 o'clock in the afternoon after Lakita got out of school. But it was totally worth it, and I've already gotten feedback from teachers that hearing from people that are high school age really and have survived cancer really adds more meaning and motivates students to want to learn more about cancer in the later half of the unit and what we can do about it. So since the release of the unit, I've contacted the Li-Fraumeni Syndrome Association and Living with LFS, and so they're aware of the unit, and I'm sure if you reached out to them for potential guest speakers, they would help connect you or provide more resources for you. Callie, that's a good question. The question in the chat is, was there a specific reason why you didn't choose a more common gene like BRCA? I'm not sure. I don't really have the answer to that question. The kind of original lead author of the unit, Kate Henson, who's at CU Boulder, she was kind of inspired to write this unit because her mom was going through breast cancer and died during the writing of this unit. So I'm sure that gene specifically was top of mind, but I'm not sure why the P53 was like ultimately chosen as the gene to focus on. But there's so many different cancer genes that have a lot of resources that you could do as extensions. So lessons 8, 11, and 12, you will learn about Lauren and Lakita and their stories. And so there's 6 different videos, three each. And so in lesson 8, you learn about the family history from Lauren and Lakita, and students look at Lakita's family tree and the people who have Li-Fraumeni syndrome. And so it's like an autosomal dominant condition. So she's had a lot of people be affected and get cancer at a young age, including her father. And she herself has had cancer 3 different times, and her leg is amputated as a result of cancer. And then Lauren, her family history is a little bit interesting in that, like, her father is the first person in her heritage that has this mutation, and then passed it on to her brother and herself. And she had cancer at 3 years old. There's a picture of her after undergoing chemo, and she also had a prophylactic mastectomy at 18 or 19 years old, and so that's described in the videos. So their experience with cancer, how they got treated, and then also their support system. So I don't have time to play all those videos there, but I think they really add a lot to the unit to hear these stories in the second half of the unit. And I hope that motivates you and your students to, get to lesson 11 and 12 where you're getting into those solutions. So and then just another kind of like thing, as I was like, I did a lot of research about Li-Fraumeni syndrome. So I made sure the material was accurate. And I found out that like there is a kind of the founder effect in southern Brazil, that like Li-Fraumeni is very rare, but it's slightly less rare in southern Brazil, and they geneticists have traced back to like an early Portuguese settler in the 1700s, who was in this kind of trade route area in southern Brazil, that was passing along this mutation. And so it's much more common, but still not that common. Like, we're talking about 15 people versus 1 family in southern Brazil. And that there are a variety of Li-Fraumeni sort of type mutations, and some have more kind of severity than others. So since the unit got released, it received an NGSS design badge, and so that was like kind of a year in waiting. So after my role with CU Boulder and OpenSciEd as a curriculum consultant kind of ended in January 2023, and I kind of submitted my revisions, did the interviews, and they kind of gets packaged and then gets reviewed by Equip, and then released as an open education resource earlier this year. And I was really excited to see that it got an NGSS design badge for its high quality. I linked to the review. If you need help falling asleep tonight, you can read the 113 pages, whatever it is. But I just was really kind of happy to see that one suggestion for improvement was that you connect with the stories of Lakita and Lauren earlier in the unit, and more frequently. So that was nice feedback to hear, and made it even more worth it to wake up at 2 in to interview Lakita all the way from Kenya. So it's just I just want to thank them for sharing their stories with all the people across the country who use this material, with their students. And then the other kind of crazy thing that was happening as I was working on this unit, my mom was running for Clark County Council and now is on the public Board of Health, making local decisions. As I was also, using that data to supplement this curriculum. So that was like a crazy coincidence. So that was really exciting to see her become on the public board of health. And I got a email I shared like the health blog story and the curriculum. And so now it's like the local board of health director, Alan Melnick, he knows about the unit and likes to see that we're having students use the data that they provide to think critically about their health and the health of their community. I'd also want to share that there's some COVID-19 health equity and units that are like K through 12. There's, I think, 4 different units that cover different grade bands. So if you're interested in incorporating more kind of public health in your classroom, you can explore those units as well. And so I just want to thank you for being here. And look at that, it's 5 o'clock. I ended right on time. Wow, that's crazy. There's on the end of the landing page, there's a little feedback form. I didn't make the feedback form, but if you're a Washington State teacher, you can get clock hours for this, an hour. And then the Washington State science teachers, they do kind of like a monthly bite-sized PD. So the next one is May 23rd, and you can sign up through our website, how you found this one, 4 to 5. And so Ayla, who's a science teacher in Seattle, she's going to be talking about project-based learning. So that's the end of my presentation. I can open it up for questions. I think I'll stop sharing and stop recording. If you have any questions, go ahead.